Okay, imagine this for a second. The deep ocean floor, right?
Yeah.
It might hold more cobalt than all the land reserves we currently know about.
It's pretty staggering.
Yeah, and the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, that huge area out in the Pacific, could have billions of tons of these things called polymetallic nodules just sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets really interesting for you, the listener, because you're probably going to hear a lot more about deep sea mining soon. It could be, well, a revolution in how we get resources.
So let's dive into that.
Let's unpack it.
What's really fascinating is just the scale. I mean, we're talking about getting minerals from the seabed at, well, incredible depths. 4 to 6 kilometers down for those nodules.
6 kilometers.
Yeah. And sometimes closer, maybe 600 meters or so for things like cobalt-rich crusts. It's a huge undertaking.
Right.
But the potential payoff, unlocking materials for EVs, electronics, renewable energy, that's the big driver here.
Exactly. So to really get a handle on what's happening way down there, we did a deep dive into some key sources. We looked at Wikipedia for the big picture, the context. Then there's a really interesting piece from Wired that pushes for a more sustainable angle.
Right, thinking about the how.
And a fantastic first-hand account from Scientific American. It basically puts you right in the middle of a deep-sea mining operation. Really brings it to life.
So connecting all that, our aim here is to give you a solid grasp of the core issues.
Yeah.
What are these resources?
Yeah, what are they actually after?
What are the upsides? And just as important, what are the potential downsides, the risks, who's involved, what are the rules or lack thereof?
We want to give you that clear, insightful perspective on this whole emerging industry. So let's start right at the beginning. What is this underwater treasure?
Okay. So there are mainly 3 types of deposits getting the most attention. First, you've got polymetallic nodules.
Okay.
Picture like potato-sized rocks scattered across the abyssal plain, that really deep ocean floor, 4 to 6 kilometers down.
Wow.
The Clarion-Clipperton Zone, or CCZ, between Hawaii and Mexico, that's the hotspot. And they're packed with manganese, nickel, copper, cobalt, molybdenum, even rare earth elements.
All the good stuff.
Pretty much. And the key thing, they just sit on the seafloor, no drilling needed.
They're just lying there.
Yeah, just lying there, which, sounds easy, but collecting them on a massive scale without stirring everything up, that's the challenge. Creates the sediment plumes we'll talk about.
Right, okay, so potato rock sitting on the seabed. What else is down there?
Then you have polymetallic sulfides. These form around hydrothermal vents.
Underwater geysers, basically.
Exactly like that. Mostly at depths of, say, 1 to 4 kilometers, usually where tectonic plates are active.
Okay.
Super hot, mineral-rich water shoots out, hits that freezing cold seawater, and boom, the minerals precipitate out. They form these deposits rich in copper, gold, lead, silver, zinc.
Like mineral chimneys growing underwater.
That's a great way to put it. Constantly growing.
Cool. Okay, and the third type?
Those are the cobalt-rich crusts. Think of them as mineral layers, almost like pavement, forming on bare rock surfaces on underwater mountains.
Yeah, seamounts, plateaus, anywhere from 600 meters down to maybe even 7,000 meters deep.
A huge range.
Huge range. And as the name suggests, lots of cobalt, but also tellurium, nickel, copper, platinum, tungsten, rare earths.
Mm-hmm.
A real mix. They're like metallic carpets spread over the rock.
So it's not just these super deep sources, right? I mean, we already do some mining closer to shore.
Oh, absolutely. We've been dredging shallower waters, maybe around 200 meters deep, for a while now, mostly for sand, silt, sometimes mineral sands like ilmenite, even diamonds in some places.
Right.
But what that Scientific American article really drove home was the concentration in these deep sea deposits. They mentioned one sample, I think it was 12.33% copper.
12%.
Yeah, that's potentially like 10 times richer than typical ores mined on land.
10 times. Okay, yeah, that definitely explains the economic interest. So where is all this happening? Or where is it planned?
Well, a lot of the exploration in international waters, the high seas, is overseen by the International Seabed Authority, the ISIT.
And most of that focus is on the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, the CCZ we mentioned.
The Pacific Zone again.
Exactly. But countries are also looking within their own waters, their exclusive economic zones, or EEZs.
Right. Like who? Any examples?
Sure. The Cook Islands, for instance, they've granted exploration licenses for those cobalt nodules. They've even partnered with China on research and exploration. They think they have significant resources there.
Interesting.
Then there's Norway. They announced plans to allow exploration permits starting in 2025 for sulfides and crusts on their continental shelf. But those plans got put on hold temporarily, at least.
Okay, a pause. That suggests it's not straightforward.
Not at all. It shows the complexity, the debates going on.
What about other places?
Well, Papua New Guinea was actually the first country to approve a deep-sea mining permit. That was for the Solwara 1 project, targeting those sulfide deposits.
Despite environmental worries.
Despite significant environmental concerns, yes. And that Scientific American piece. It gives us incredibly detailed first-hand look at mining tests happening there. A company called Magellan was doing the work under a license held by Deep Sea Mining Finance. It's really revealing.
Wow. And the U.S., Japan.
The U.S. has identified potential spots in its waters near Hawaii, the Blake Plateau off the East Coast, California, Gulf of Alaska, each with its own risks, of course. And Japan confirmed a huge nodule field near an island called Minamotorishima, apparently with a lot of cobalt.
So it's really global interest. Okay, we know what they're mining and roughly where. How do they actually get it? You can't just send down a digger.
Definitely not. The methods depend on the deposit. For those sulfide chimneys near vents, they're looking at things like hydraulic pumps or maybe a big remotely operated buckets.
Like a giant claw machine?
Sort of, yeah. But for the nodules, the ones just sitting there, the idea's more complex. Picture a big collector vehicle, like a sophisticated underwater vacuum cleaner crawling across the seabed.
Okay, vacuuming up the nodules.
Right, but doing that kicks up a lot of fine sediment, creating this plume, this cloud, in the water column above. Then the nodules themselves get pumped up through a long pipe, maybe kilometers long, to a ship on the surface.
A giant straw from the deep sea. That SciAm article must have seen this up close in PNG.
They did. The reporter was on a Danish ship, the MV Coco, operated by Magellan. They watched this massive 12-ton hydraulic claw controlled by an ROV.
12 tons.
Yeah, grabbing chunks of the seafloor. It took like an hour just to lift one load to the surface.
An hour per load. Wow.
And the article mentioned challenges, dealing with those sediment plumes, even losing some material on the way up that long pipe.
Makes sense.
We also know China's involved COAMRA, their ocean minerals agency. They've been testing collection systems in the CCZ and their own waters. And there's research into more selective pickup tech, trying to minimize how much habitat gets disturbed.
Minimizing disturbance. That seems absolutely crucial. Because this is where the big arguments start, right? The environmental impact.
That's the absolute core of the controversy, and for very good reason. Groups like Greenpeace, the Deep Sea Mining Campaign, they're raising serious alarms.
About what specifically?
About potentially irreversible damage to these deep sea ecosystems, which we honestly still know very little about, and pollution from those plumes, which could be carrying heavy metals.
Let's dig into those impacts. Sediment plumes, they sound like a major issue.
They really are. So you collect the nodules or sulfides, you process them, and you're left with fine particles, tailings. If these get discharged back into the ocean, especially near the surface, these tiny particles can just hang suspended in the water for ages, spreading over huge areas with the currents. Makes the water cloudy, turbid.
Which is bad because
it can smother filter-feeding animals, clog their feeding systems. It can block sunlight, affecting any photosynthesis, though that's less of an issue in the very deep sea. It can also reduce oxygen levels. Even plumes near the bottom can spread and smother life.
And it's not just the plumes. The actual mining, scraping the seabed. That sounds destructive.
Totally. It's called benthic disturbance, basically, destroying the seafloor habitat itself. And studies suggest recovery in these deep, slow-growing environments is incredibly slow.
How slow?
Decades, maybe centuries. Some ecosystems might just never fully come back. Those nodule fields, for example, aren't just rocks. They're crucial, hard surfaces. Things live on them.
Ah, okay. Like an anchor point.
Exactly. They support diverse communities, big and small stuff. Mining just removes that habitat entirely, creates the plumes, and can release toxic trace metals locked in the sediment or the nodules themselves.
Metals that get into the food chain.
Potentially, yes. Bioaccumulation is a concern. Some studies even suggest the biodiversity loss could be way worse than land mining for the same amount of metal.
Wow. We also saw mentions of noise and light pollution. Feels weird to think about that in the deep, dark ocean.
But it's a real concern. These are normally incredibly quiet, dark places. The noise from ships, from the collector vehicles, the pumps, it could seriously mess with deep sea fish, marine mammals, disrupt their behavior, their communication. Many use sound. It could even damage their hearing. And the lights, Powerful lights are needed to see down there.
Right.
But organisms adapted to total darkness can be harmed. There's research showing shrimp near hydrothermal vents suffering permanent eye damage from submersible lights.
Just from the light.
Just from the light, it really shows how unprepared these ecosystems are for this kind of disturbance.
It paints a picture of a really fragile, interconnected system facing multiple threats.
Yeah.
Now, there was something about dark oxygen in the sources.
Mm.
Sounded intriguing, but maybe controversial.
Ah, yes. That was fascinating. The idea that manganese nodules themselves might actually produce oxygen through some chemical process, not photosynthesis.
Oxygen without light.
Exactly, a chemosynthetic pathway. It was a potentially huge finding because we mostly associate oxygen production with sunlight and algae.
Right.
But it's faced a lot of pushback from other scientists. Questions about the methods used, whether it fits with other research. There have even been calls to retract the paper.
Still very much up in the air.
Very much. It highlights how little we still know about fundamental processes down there, and, it adds another layer of uncertainty. What if mining disrupts something vital we don't even understand yet?
Absolutely. Okay, so with all these massive environmental questions, who's actually in charge? Who makes the rules for deep-sea mining?
Right. In international waters, the seabed beyond any country's national jurisdiction, the main body is the International Seabed Authority, the ISA. We're set up under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLS. The ISA regulates all mineral activities in this vast area known simply as the area.
And what have they done so far?
They've issued quite a few exploration licenses, mostly in that Clarion-Clipperton zone we keep mentioning, but they haven't finalized the rules for actual exploitation yet, the commercial mining part. They're working on it, aiming for completion maybe by 2025.
UNCLS, that sounds like the foundational law here.
It absolutely is. UNCLS is basically the Constitution for the oceans. It established this key principle that the area and its resources are the common heritage of mankind.
Common heritage. What does that mean practically?
It means, theoretically, that no single country or company can just claim it. It should be used peacefully, and the financial benefits from mining should be shared equitably among all nations, especially developing ones.
Okay.
UNCLS also set up the ISA and other bodies like the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ITLOS, to manage things.
And companies can't just go rogue. There's this state sponsorship thing.
Exactly. If a company, private or state-owned, wants to mine in the area, it needs to be sponsored by a country that's part of UNCLS.
So the country takes responsibility.
In essence, yes. The sponsoring state has to ensure the company follows the rules, including environmental ones. It's a way to bring private actors under the international legal framework. And it generally excludes entities from non-NCLS countries.
Now, what's this 2-year rule we kept reading about? Sounds a bit dramatic.
It kind of is. It's a provision in UNCLS that's caused a lot of debate. Basically, if a sponsoring state says its company intends to apply for an exploitation license, it can trigger this rule, demanding the ISA Council finalize the exploitation regulations within 2 years.
And if they don't?
If the deadline passes and the rules aren't ready, the council still has to consider and provisionally approve the mining application anyway, even without the full set of finalized environmental rules in place.
Wow. Who triggered that?
The small island nation of Nauru did, back in 2021, on behalf of a company called the Metals Company.
And the 2 years are up?
Yep, the deadline passed in mid-2023. So now there's this huge pressure on the ISA and a lot of uncertainty about what happens next if applications come in before the rules are fully agreed upon. It really pits the push for mining against environmental caution.
So Nauru, a small nation, is really driving this forward. Why them?
Well, Nauru sees this as a major economic opportunity, potentially transformative for them. They also argue these minerals are essential for the green transition globally. It really highlights that tension embedded in UNCLS itself, the mandate to exploit resources for the benefit of humankind, including developing states, versus the obligation to protect the marine environment. How to balance those two is the billion-dollar question.
Feels like we're right at a tipping point. What are the core economic drivers pushing this so hard?
It really boils down to the soaring global demand for critical minerals. Think cobalt, nickel, copper, rare earths. essential for clean energy tech.
EVs, batteries, wind turbine.
Exactly, all of it. And the deep seabed seems to hold absolutely vast quantities of these metals, maybe even more than known land reserves in some cases.
So a huge potential supply.
Huge potential supply. And potentially very high-grade deposits may be easier to get at than digging through tons of rock on land less overburdened. Plus, for many countries, it's strategic. Diversify supply chains, reduce reliance on just a few land-based sources.
Like China, for instance.
Well, China is a major player in processing many land-based minerals, but yes, securing direct access to new sources is definitely a factor. And don't forget the ISA's mandate for benefit sharing that could mean real economic gains for developing nations, at least in theory.
But it can't all be upside. What are the economic risks or downsides?
Oh, definitely significant risks. First, the upfront cost is astronomical. Developing the tech, building the ships, the processing facilities, it requires massive investment.
And just operating down there must be expensive.
Extremely. Plus, the whole venture is very vulnerable to swings in global metal prices. If prices drop, the economics could fall apart quickly.
And the environmental damage. Does that have an economic cost?
That's the huge, often uncounted cost.
Yeah.
If mining destroys a biodiversity or disrupts ecosystem functions like fisheries support or carbon sequestration, that's a loss of natural capital. The long-term economic value lost could potentially dwarf the short-term profits from the minerals themselves.
This definitely sounds like it could stir up geopolitical issues, too.
For sure. You have nations competing for access to resources, just like they do on land, maybe even more intensely if land supplies dwindle. It could create new lines of tension.
We mentioned China's interest.
Yes. China has invested heavily in deep-sea techs, submersibles, exploration ships. They're clearly positioning themselves. The U.S. Department of Defense has even noted rising foreign military sales globally, suggesting a resource-hungry buildup that deep-sea minerals could feed into. Control or access becomes strategic.
Looking ahead, then, what are the big trends and uncertainties we should watch?
Well, demand for critical minerals is almost certainly going to keep rising with the energy transition. That seems clear, but
Yeah.
how much demand exactly? Can recycling and better resource efficiency help meet it? Will we find new major deposits on land? Those are unknowns. And technologically, can we actually extract and process these deep-sea minerals efficiently, affordably, and crucially without wrecking the environment? Big uncertainties there, too.
It feels like deep-sea mining has been talked about for ages. What's the quick history?
Yeah, the initial buzz was way back in the 1960s. Early surveys suggested huge mineral wealth. Countries like the US, Germany, France started exploring.
But it didn't take off then.
No, the early estimates were maybe a bit overblown. Technology wasn't quite there. And then metal prices dropped in the 80s, so interest kind of faded.
Until recently.
Exactly. Renewed interest really picked up in the 2000s, and especially the last 10 years or so, driven by that rising mineral demand and better technology.
And the 2020s seem like they've been particularly busy.
Incredibly so. You've had growing calls for moratoriums from scientists, conservation groups, even some countries. Then Nauru, triggering the 2-year rule, really lit a fire under the ISA.
Right.
Companies have been out there testing collector systems. Norway made its move, then paused. The EU Parliament raised concerns. Palau called for a halt. China showed off new deep-sea vehicles.
And that Scientific American article from April 2025 suggesting commercial mining might have actually started.
Yeah, that first-time report from Papua New Guinea is potentially huge. It suggests that while the international rules are still being hammered out, commercial-scale operations might already be underway in national waters.
That's a really significant potential development, if true.
It really is, especially with all the ongoing debate and lack of finalized global regulations. You're also seeing more pushback protests, big companies like BMW saying they won't use deep-sea minerals for now, the UK joining the call for a moratorium.
But others are pushing forward.
Absolutely. Proponents argue it's necessary for the green transition, and they point to things like the circular economy or better efficiency as helpful, but not enough on their own.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've got this massive potential resource on the deep seabed, vital for modern tech. But extracting it comes with huge environmental question marks, lots of scientific unknowns.
Yeah, and a really complex, evolving regulatory picture. Plus, major economic and geopolitical forces pulling in different directions.
And that aha moment maybe comes from that SIAM report suggesting commercial mining might already be quietly happening in PNG. That's quite startling given all the public debate.
It really drives home how fast things might be moving, maybe faster than the policy and science can keep up.
which makes this incredibly relevant for you, the listener, because these materials could literally be inside the devices you use, the cars you drive, the energy systems we build, but getting them involves these really serious potential trade-offs we're just starting to grapple with.
And that leaves us with a really fundamental question, doesn't it? As we stand here, maybe on the edge of large-scale deep-sea mining, how do we possibly balance this urgent need for resources, especially for a greener future, with the absolute need to protect these unique, poorly understood, potentially vital deep ocean ecosystems?
Yeah.
What's our responsibility as individuals, as consumers, as nations? How do we ensure that if this goes ahead, it's done sustainably, ethically, if that's even possible?
Definitely some heavy questions to ponder. If you want to explore this more, we really recommend looking into the ISA's work, finding some of those environmental studies, and checking out the arguments around alternatives like recycling and mineral substitution.
There's a whole hidden world down there, and understanding what's at stake is becoming more important every day.